Now that we've logged in successfully to the application, what we need to do is navigate to the next work item. There's a couple of ways of doing this. Initially, I'm going to show you the easiest way to navigate, but then I'm going to show you a more effective way of doing it. Let's use UiPath to record the steps to get from the dashboard into the work item. Let's create a new sequence and let's call it Acme Navigate to Work Items. Okay, one thing you'll notice is that this component is completely blank. So let's add a log message at the start to make sure that when we're looking at this from another machine, we know that the component has been started and finished. Let's say started, Acme Navigate to Work Items. And let's copy it and create a similar log that says finished. This will make it easier for us to debug any problems in the future. Okay, now let's get the recorder. Click record and record the steps that we want to take. Work items. And then let's find a row that is WI5 and open and click the magnifying glass. I'm going to select no to using an anchor and escape to stop the recording. So you can see that the recording places the new sequence below our log message. So I'm going to move that up slightly to make sure that it's in the right order. And let's have a quick look at the recording. We're clicking work items, double check the selector, everything looks okay to me. Click button. Okay, this time it's using the CSS selector. I don't really like the look of this selector, so I'm going to open up UI Explorer. UI Explorer allows us to inspect the elements of various applications. Let's click Indicate Element. F2 because we're not on the right page. Let's go back. Let's go and find that magnifying glass. So this is a way of navigating to the page that we want to be on. However, the problem is when we're selecting the magnifying glass, we're not picking a specific row. So there's a slightly better way of getting to the page that we want to get to. If you look in the URL, you can see that the number, WID of the work item is included within the URL. And we can use this to navigate directly to this page rather than trying to work out which of all of these work items we need to pick. If we did that, we would have to search for the WID on each page and then proceed to the next page until we find the exact ID that we wanted to work with. This may be something that you have to do in real life, but in this case, we're lucky that we can use the URL to navigate directly to the page that we want to be on. Okay, so how do we get from the dashboard directly to this URL? Let's copy that URL and go back to UiPath. So instead of clicking work items, we actually don't even need to navigate to the work items page. So we can delete all of this. Simply, we need to attach to the browser initially. We know that the browser is the Acme System 1. When we quickly look at the selector for the Acme System 1, we can see that it contains the title of the subpage work items. What we want to do is wildcard this using an asterisk. It doesn't matter which page we're on, as long as we're within the Acme System 1 application, this selector will work. Next, we're going to use the Navigate To activity to navigate to the specific page that we want to navigate to. Okay, this needs to be placed in quotes. And if we return to our home page and run our robot, we can see that we've successfully navigated to the page with the specific working ID. Fantastic. Now, just like in the previous activity, the login to Acme, where we passed an argument in, we need to do the same thing because we don't want to simply navigate to the same WID each time. We want to pass in a new one, navigate to whichever page is relevant for that particular WID. So let's copy that number. Control X to cut and add a plus sign. What we need to do is we need to create an argument into our component, which is going to be called in_WID. We'll paste the value of our WID in the default value, And in our activity navigate URL, we're going to use the InWID. Again, you can see IntelliSense pops up, helpfully prompting us with the InWID argument name. So let's make sure we're back on the home page. Let's run the robot and make sure that everything's working as expected. And if we go back into the application, we can see that the page has been returned to with the WID, and we've used an argument to get there. So we've created a component which can navigate directly to a specific work item. But say, for example, this default value or the WID wasn't provided as part of the component. What would happen? Well, let's run it to see. In this case, we're navigated back to a different web page. This isn't the right result for our component. What we wanted to do was navigate to work items with a specific WID at the end of it. So one thing we can do is make sure at the start of our component that we have a check that the WID has been provided to that component. Let's grab an if statement, drag it into our component and place it at the top, just under the log message. So we know we have an argument called InWID. What we can do is a condition called string.isNull or empty, open brackets, and place our argument name into the value. If you start typing the name of your variable and press Control space, the IntelliSense prompts you with the name of your argument. Let's use that. So if it is empty, what we want to do is throw an exception. An exception is a way of breaking out of a workflow by throwing an error deliberately. In order to throw this exception, we need to enter some code into the exception property of that exception. So let's start typing new exception. In the exception, we can put whatever text we want. So we're going to say the WID was not provided. Okay. Additionally, in the right-hand side of the if statement, we're going to put a log message. We're going to give the user, or whoever's viewing this process from a different machine, some information about the process. Here we're going to say the WID is, and pass in our argument value. This will provide some information to the user in the output panel, which we'll see shortly. So let's run this. Great, so we're prompted with a message on screen which says the WID was not provided. This, of course, isn't something we'd want to do once the robot is running unattended in the future. However, in the short term, it's good to know that an error was successfully thrown. Later, we'll handle this, and I'll show you how we can do this later on. Press OK. Now, if we take a valid default value for the WID, let's double check the process works successfully. Great, we've navigated back to the WID. So doing this, we can ensure that the information that's been passed to our component is correct. There are a number of other things we can do as well. For example, we can check that we're on the correct screen. We can check that if we're looking for a particular file path for an application, then we can check that that file path exists. And as we start to create more components, we'll start to build up a template which will allow us to quickly include all of this validation as part of every component that we create.